Hi everyone, this is video number 2 on basic techniques and skills. There's no main topic for this lecture other than an overview of the tools we will be utilizing throughout the remainder of this program. In this lecture, we will cover an overview of all of the skills necessary for proper communication. Let us begin. Here's a list of all the skills and basic techniques you will learn throughout the program. It is very important to practice each and every one of these skills along with every lecture. You can also try to implement them into your daily interactions for better retention. After all, you'll need to become comfortable with these skills in order to be a successful listener. Being introduced to these skills will also make you more aware of how you react to different situations and how you accept new information received from people around you. Let's start this lecture with one of the most important skills a listener must possess: voice tone. Voice tone is considered to be one of the most important skills because it affects the rest of the skills that you will learn throughout this program. Voice tone is measured by volume, matching the other person, emotion, voice speed, and being non-judgmental. An example: if your friend is talking loud and excited about something, so would you. It is important that on all levels you match the voice tone of the patient or the person that you are talking to, the same way you would match the voice tone in a conversation with a friend. So if the patient is very upset about something, how should you respond? Again, let's think about a friend. If your friend was upset, you would want to comfort them. It is important that your voice reflects a sense of caring and a sense of understanding. At all times, it is important that you come from a place of curiosity. The worst thing that you could do is sound robotic. A robotic or monotonous voice does not sound like it cares or even like it's engaged in the conversation. Judgment-free zone. It is important that your voice tone does not reflect any judgment. You need to be aware of the fact that sometimes patients will hold information back in fear of being judged. To prevent and fix this, you should create a judgment-free zone for your patients. As we start going into more details about the different topics that we cover, you might find some things that you don't agree with personally. We never know the opinions that patients are going to have, and so we want them to feel safe to express themselves, even if it goes against your personal beliefs. Because you will be talking to patients, sometimes the words you say can come off as judgmental, even if there's no judgment behind them. Interjections or filler words like and so can be interpreted as being judgmental. Another form of speech that you should avoid is the use of why questions. Why questions often leave the person answering them sounding like they have to defend themselves, and we don't want to put our patients on the defensive. Even though you might, out of genuine curiosity, wonder as to why the patient said or did something, avoid why questions at all times. Instead, replace a why question with a what question. So instead of asking someone like, why did you wake up at noon? You can ask, what was your reason for waking up at noon? Again, even that what question can come off as judgmental with the wrong voice tone. Empathy. Empathy is defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. I just wanted to explain the difference between empathy versus sympathy before we move forward into this section. When describing what you feel about the person's emotions, you might use one of the two words, empathy versus sympathy. These words sound very similar. They both come from Greek and therefore are confused very often. It is important to note that we do not offer sympathy, but we want to offer empathy. Often in times of grief, you hear everybody saying things like, I'm sorry, but that is not what we do. We like to show the patient that we care by being empathetic and acknowledging the emotions that they are feeling and letting them know that we understand why they're feeling the way they're feeling. Showing empathy is the easiest way to build rapport. Rapport is built by creating a safe environment for the patient to talk freely about whatever they would like to talk about. When there is a strong rapport, both you and the patient will be able to talk freely, and the patient will feel comfortable to answer any questions that you may ask. Big picture question. It is important that as you listen to your patient, that you ask appropriate questions. Oftentimes, the patient will say something briefly that is actually a bigger problem than they left off. Patient will also mention things that they assume you might know, but it is not something you have been exposed to. Make sure that you ask questions that will help you get more clarification as to what the patient is talking about. Your questions will help you take control of the conversation, and all you talk about things that you think are important. You might also need to use big picture questions to change the focus of the conversation. For example, if a patient mentions that they nearly fainted in the morning but is trying to talk about an upcoming vacation, you might want to redirect the conversation to the morning event. If there's something that you do not know about, do not pretend like you do. Instead, ask some clarifying questions to get more details and to help you better identify with the patient. There will be plenty of times when the patient will not go into much detail, and so you will need to ask questions to gather important information. Some important information you might need to ask for is their feelings, safety, and details about what actually happened. Remember that you might be the first person that they're talking to about their situation, so make sure that any questions that you ask come from a place of curiosity. Please note, at this point of your academic and professional training, you are not qualified to problem solve, and this program is not designed to help you problem solve, but merely to help you become a better listener and a communicator. Although we want to help our patients in any way that we can, we are not problem solvers. There will be patients who will expect you to solve their problems, but that is not our job. We are here to listen and to help them process emotions. One of the biggest reasons why we do not problem solve is because our advice might not always work. The worst thing that we could do is give bad advice that might make their situation even worse. We do not have any way of knowing what kind of damage our problem-solving skills can have, and the odds of being able to follow through with any advice is very difficult. If the patient asks you to solve their problem, it is important to redirect the question back to them. The best way to reply to the situation is to say, "What do you think you should do?" It is important to think about the way you ask certain questions, as they may come off as problem solving. One of the biggest mistakes that hospital volunteers or pre-health professionals who interact with patients make in general is that they say, "Have you spoken to your doctor or spouse or children or parents, etc. about that?" Sometimes it might seem like the problem would be addressed if they reached out to someone or confronted the person they have a problem with, or if they went and spoke to the doctor. But this is not something for you to decide. Even though you might be asking this question as a big picture question, it would be better if you asked, "Am I the first person you are talking to about this?" Because it will allow them the opportunity to say who they spoke to, without making them feel like they should have. By asking if they spoke to someone else, it takes away your credibility as a listener. They are choosing to open up to you, and it is important that you do not belittle your value as a listener by giving them other people to speak to. If the patient is very persistent about getting your opinion, you can give it to them, but you don't have to. You are never required to divulge any information about yourself if you don't want to. Even if you're comfortable sharing your personal information, keep it to a minimum, because we want to keep the focus on the patient. If you choose to share something personal, make sure to add a phrase like, "But everyone is different," because you do not want the patient to assume the exact same thing would happen to them that happened to you. If you want to avoid sharing your opinion or what you would do in a situation, you can say, "What I would do in this situation might be different than what you should do. What do you think you should do?" The person who is asking questions is the person who has control of the conversation, so always try to redirect their questions back to themselves. Problem solving can be really fun and tempting, but we do not want to give the patient false hope or make promises that we cannot keep. In most situations, the patient with the problem knows what they have to do internally, but they need someone to talk to in order to work it out. Trust that the patient can solve their own problems and do not engage in problem solving. Let them come up with their own solutions and work with them to figure out which solution they think is best, or leave it to the healthcare professionals who are trained to do this. Normalization and validation. One of the main goals during your conversation should be to help the patient identify how they feel. Once they identify their emotion, you should use normalization and validation to help them realize that it is okay to feel the way that they do. For normalization, you want to help the patient realize that the feelings they're having are normal. For validation, you want to let the patient know that their feelings are valid. To understand the difference between normalization and validation, a comparison of the two is the easiest. Let's take an example of a person who is angry that they broke their ankle. One feeling that they might identify is anger. So for normalization, you would want to say something like, "It's normal to be angry when you break your ankle." Make sure that you mention the emotion and why it is normal in order for the person to be able to properly identify that their emotion is normal. A validation would sound like, "I would be angry too if I broke my ankle," or "A lot of people would be angry too if they broke their ankle." It is very important to validate or normalize an emotion and not an action. This will get more crucial when we start talking about patients demonstrating aggressive and inappropriate behavior. Summarization is a really important tool that you should use to help the patient know you have a good understanding about what they have talked about. Summarization can be really useful when the patient tells you a lot of information and you need some time to process it. It is a good tool to use when you are stuck in what to say as well. However, you should avoid using summarization too often, as it may annoy the patient if you're summarizing after each sentence they say. If you are dealing with a patient who is rambling and talking a lot, summarization can also be used to help you take control of the conversation. Summarization is also a good tool to use at the end of a conversation to help the person identify what the progress they made throughout the conversation. Reflection. Instead of summarizing often, you can also use some reflections. A reflection is a brief summary and usually just repeats the last fact the patient mentioned. Be careful to have the right voice tone when you reflect so it does not come off as judgmental. You can even incorporate a reflection with a big picture question. For example, if the patient tells you they went to the hospital, you reply by asking, "What did you go to the hospital for?" instead of just saying, "What for?" to help the patient know you are actually listening. Empowerment is when you help inspire the patient and identify their courage, bravery, and strength. Empowerment is usually used by saying something like, "You are so brave for," and then you fill in the blank. Or, "I think you are such a strong person for," and then you mention the specific situation that the patient is talking about in the conversation. Empowerment should be used when needed, and you should avoid simple empowerment such as "thank you for sharing," as it can come off as if you're trying to end a conversation. But we'll go into more details about empowerment in the later modules. Control is also a skill that we will be going over in the upcoming modules. For now, remember that the person who has control is the person who is asking the questions. Please follow the link to the quiz for this lecture. And with that, we will conclude today's module. Thank you.